Hello and welcome to Mindfulness Alchemy for the Modern Soul. I'm Esther Vidic and I'm joined by Josh Reid Jones today for the second time. Now a little introduction. Josh is the founder of the Just Be Nice project. He's a social change ambassador and also a public speaker. We've done a recording with Josh earlier this year, so if you haven't yet, you might want to go back and listen to that. And today, we have a really big topic, and we have a very sensitive topic. And I'll title this recording Universal Human Dignity and Dangerous Ideologies. And although it's a little bit different from my usual stuff, but I really wanted to talk about it as in mindfulness of who we are and how we conduct ourselves in the world. And I'm so glad that Josh is joining me today. So thank you, Josh.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I'm very excited to talk with you about this. And so this morning, when I was getting ready for us to record, I actually listened to the Slovenian Prime Minister. I might butcher her name, but her name is Natasha Pirc Musar, I believe that's how we pronounce it, as she addressed the United Nations General Assembly. And I thought her speech was very spot on. And I thought we could start with Albert Bandura's, who was a psychologist, and he wrote a wonderful book. And the title of the book is Moral Disengagement, How People Do Harm and Live with Themselves. So that's a mouthful. But in this book, he talks about, and this is very fascinating, so I would like to share this with you, 8 distinct behaviors of moral disengagement. Number 1 is moral justification. When we say things like, it was necessary because we are working towards a greater purpose. Just how many times we hear this when we hear political speeches, for example. Then there's euphemistic language. When we use terms like, we are restoring our values, and that justifies why we're doing a certain thing, a bad thing. Advantageous comparison, when we say, oh, we are nothing like them. Or displacement of responsibility, when we say, I had to do it, as in I had to carry out a certain thing because I was ordered or instructed to do so. Or the diffusion of responsibility, when I say, oh, but I wasn't the only person doing it. Or then disregarding consequences, excuse me, and say things, oh, it wasn't a big deal. Then there's dehumanizing, which is very scary. When we say things like, oh, these people are nothing like us, they are like animals. And then there's attribution of blame, where we say, but I am the actual victim here, I had to defend myself. So I believe we understand that moral engagement is a unifying force, and moral engagement that stops us from preventing, it stops us from huge atrocities and genocide, and it stops division. And so I think if you follow the news, because you cannot, it will pop up, and you will see these things coming at you 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time. The news, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening around the world, and so on. And we see the mechanism of moral disengagement at full swing. And so what I wanted to ask you, because you are a public speaker and you work with people, and so what are your thoughts on this and your observations of what's going on in this crazy world at the moment?
Well, there's a lot going on, obviously, and I think there's an undeniable moral disengagement in many areas. there's a challenge of extrapolating the intentions and actions of a powerful few into the many. I think that can be difficult. It's not true that everyone has the same agency when it comes to making decisions of I guess huge human impact. Even though we all have the chance to make good moral decisions all the time, but for instance, there's a challenge with. The situation in Gaza is one that springs to mind immediately. Where on the one hand, there's a country that has democratic institutions and has a government in place that is functioning, and they're imposing their will and committing a genocide on a community that doesn't have a functioning government, and so the agency of even the individuals in, say, Palestine is not the same as the agency of the individuals in Israel, and so that means that the challenges of who's responsible have to be tackled a little bit differently. Like, you've got a bunch of people with no agency; they can't move the needle on what the sort of, I guess, administration, if you want to call that, or Hamas or whatever. Or PLO or whatever, depending on where they are in Palestine, they don't have the same agency perhaps as the people who are in Israel, who have a representative democracy. And it's sort of the same in the States, where people have the right to vote, and but at the top the power is very concentrated. I think at the top, where the concentration is, there is an extreme disregard of moral responsibility. Like, absolutely, there's no doubt that people are abrogating their responsibilities to a global community. We've seen it at, you referenced the Estonian speech at the UN, but I mean, Donald Trump's speech at the UN was one of the worst. It's just a terrible piece of rhetoric, and as well as poorly spoken. I mean, just objectively, he's a terrible speaker and incomprehensible. But his policies clearly, meet a lot of these 8 steps that you've just sort of outlined, as do Netanyahu's, as do Putin's, as do a lot of people who are seeking to, I guess, extract and take from people who don't have the means or the agency to prevent that. So the challenge then is as bystanders almost, and we are complicit in a variety of ways in all of these things. But as bystanders, as allies, as other members of a global community, what's your moral responsibility then? Is it to allow them to use these excuses as a way for us to not engage and say this is actually wrong? Or do we sort of say, well, I appreciate that you're trying to say, that it's not you, and that these people aren't normal people, and that, they did it first, or they do it worse, or whatever, but we disagree, and this is objectively wrong, what's happening. And I think that for a country like Australia, and for people who don't have, skin in the policy game or in the military or whatever, that it's our moral responsibility then to at least make the case against these things, and try and push back against the sort of slide towards leaning into accepting those 8 steps that you just laid out before. So yeah. It's kind of, I think you can take for a given that people are going to use that 8-step process and those 8 tools in their tool belt to achieve the means that they want, which is, the dehumanization and extraction and, domination and all this kind of stuff. And that's okay, but we can recognize that as being a sort of morally bankrupt way of doing business. No. So if you want to not be that, you have to push back against all of those things. And if you want to push back against them, I think you also have to be like demonstrating them and living them as well, not just saying that you're pushing back against them. And I think that's where we're falling down in a lot of ways in sort of in various ways, but in lots of countries and in lots of administrations and lots of places around the globe on a global scale. And of course, that's a little bit different to how people treat each other in their own communities. But there's definitely follow through. So I think it's easy to observe and acknowledge that these sorts of things are definitely happening, and they're happening on a massive scale again at the moment. The hows and whys of that happening, there's 20 hours of conversation in that, but I think if you see it happening, that you have a moral responsibility to sort of push back against it and say that that's not right, and not just to say it, but also to act so that when you say it, it's got some integrity. You're not just saying it and doing the same thing yourself, which is another thing I see a lot of at the moment.
Yeah, that's the other thing as well, that it trickles down to our immediate environment as such, because that leads to, I think, essentially to that we are scared of each other nonstop, that we look at the other person funny, you know what I mean? If they are from a different, let's say, ethnic background or whatever. And I think this is very dangerous. Just like any ideology or any manipulative technique or manipulation can be very dangerous when taken to the extreme, because we stop seeing the individual and we are running with that kind of propaganda that, let's hate this particular group of people. And the other thing is very concerning, in my opinion, is that today, let's say we are going after blonde-haired people, and we say blonde-haired people are bad. And then we eliminate and destroy all the blonde-haired people. And then we are happy, no more blonde-haired people. And then next time we go like, okay, but now I think that the red-haired people are the bad people, so we go after them. So it's very important, I think, to keep in mind that because it's happening to a certain group of people, it doesn't mean that next time it's not the group of people you or I belong to.
Yeah.
And so that's when it becomes scary, when you see it in your own immediate environment. And we see that in Australia. We had marches not too long ago at the end of August. And I personally, I don't follow the news. I allow myself maybe twice a week when I read headlines, because it's too much. And it's very scary. And it takes me away from actually focusing on the individuals I'm meeting. And, so what's your observation when it comes to our smaller groups, our immediate environment, our communities? How is it impacting people? How is it impacting people you meet?
It's interesting. There's an English writer called G.K. Chesterton, and he's from, I want to say, like the late 19th, early 20th century kind of writing, and he has this interesting point about, people think like small town people are like less cosmopolitan than city people, that they're less understanding, that they know less, all this kind of stuff, that old thing he said. But actually, they're more cosmopolitan, because in a big city, you can make choices to avoid people that you don't want to hang out with. And in a small town, you're kind of just thrust with whoever you get. So, there's 100 people, you've got to know all of them, and they're just going to be whoever they are. You don't get a say in picking who they are. They come from wherever, and they believe whatever, and they do whatever. And you're forced to sort of find a way to get along and understand and know what's going on and engage with them and do that sort of stuff, which in a city you can avoid. And I think that the internet is a great example of how that's happening. And then things like big cities and people finding these interest groups and then finding these, some of these groups are avowed neo-Nazi groups, for instance, which they're making decisions to attract people to that and avoid people who think otherwise. And the capacity for people to avoid having to deal with people that they don't want to, which is a big city thing and an internet thing, is the perfect setup to make people scared of each other and encourage that avoidance. And so it's hard because of the urgency and intensity of all the news and all of the rhetoric that people forget to have paid attention. I don't know if they just forget to pay attention. They don't look backwards, or they start filtering everything that they remember, or that they, or even just data. They filter it through this lens of like, I'm just trying to get it to justify this thing that I want to do. And there's not like a broad study. They're not like actually trying to understand stuff. They're not worried about consistency. And so we end up in this situation where you've got these protests or these marches where people are being forced together with, well, not forced together, but people are coming together with perhaps different ideas about why they're there, but some of them have the worst ideas, and they're getting pushed together so that they can interact. And there's another group of people saying, you guys are all the worst universally, which drives them perhaps away from that idea because those people seem mean. The Nazis over here seem nice to me, like they're getting behind and telling these mean people to stop yelling at me, and so maybe they're not as bad, maybe I was wrong or whatever, and you get this positive feedback of drift away from others and just into more insular and less tolerant circles. And that's true in every direction, I think. I think it's the lack of tolerance and grace and understanding that really underpins a lot of the public discussion and a lot of the challenges that we're having at the moment, where one side is saying we want tolerance and grace but not giving it, or another side's doing the same thing. We want to be strong and tough, but but when you stand up and be strong and tough, we cry about it and say, "Oh, what are you doing? You can't do that." Like, there's just hypocrisy and inconsistency everywhere. And the old idea that you could just prosecute a good argument, that you could prosecute something that makes sense, that you could encourage people to look through history or look through their own ideas, or it sort of doesn't matter, because whatever is in front of them is just getting bent into this idea. And a lot of that is because they don't have to deal with people that they don't know, they don't agree with, that don't look like them, that think differently. You can just avoid them all the time, and you never have to reconcile that tension. So I think in this sort of time where there's the internet and the capacity to make choices about who you're talking to, where there are lots of people who are isolated, then they get to form small groups that never have to interact with anyone else. You can make people scared very easily if that's the setup that we've got in a society. You can have them ostracize the other, and like you said, that other can change at a moment's notice. They can go from being in charge to not being in charge. And then the destructive forces of people who don't care about rules, who don't care about social norms, who don't care about fairness, who don't care about consistency or integrity, they have a disproportionate advantage in any of these conflicts, whether they're verbal or physical or whatever. Because when you don't follow the rules, and when you're prepared to lie, and when you're prepared to cheat, and when you're prepared to say one thing today and another thing tomorrow, and you don't have any problem with them being completely different as long as it gets you what you want in the moment, then people who have the burden of integrity and truth and consistency are at a disadvantage. And we don't talk about that very much. We don't say, like, we tell people, oh, you should do the right thing and you should pay attention, you should do all this. But the power is with the people who don't do that most of the time. It's very easy to do that, and it's very hard to overcome people who just go, well, no, get stuffed. And you're like, but you can't do that. And you're like, well, I'm doing it. And so a very small number of people then get that momentum, and in a place where you start to value this, I guess, projection of like what looks like maybe power or confidence or competence, but it's all smoke and mirrors. In a time where people are being made scared of a lot of people, that becomes more attractive again. And so it's this kind of like virtuous or unvirtuous cycle where you separate people out, you make people scared of each other. Someone stands up and says, I'm strong, and they just say whatever they want to say, and they don't take a backward step, and they're lying, and it's not true, and they're saying the opposite of what they said a week ago, but they're saying it with conviction. And people go, well, that looks strong. That looks like someone who knows what's going on. I'm terrified of everything over here. I think I'm going to go throw my lot in over there. And they have no problem whacking the other side with the things that they do all the time, and we've seen this in the States with the death of Charlie Kirk, for instance, where they're like, oh, I can't believe you guys did this. Like, who's you? It's a amorphous you. It doesn't exist. But all the things that they've been doing and saying, a version of something happens on this side and they say, see, you guys are the worst. And they don't see any problem with that because it's not about winning the argument. It's about attracting people to this idea of strength. And so I think that's how we end up with these things like the March for Australia. That's how we end up with like these small groups that are only a few hundred people, but are still incredibly dangerous. The power of the sort of the people who disregard a commitment to any kind of consistency, integrity, social norms, whatever, it's disproportionate because you have to do 20 times the work to undo bullshit that someone can just say in 1 second and walk off and leave you with. And so I think that's how we end up in this challenging moment where, to have the credibility to stand up against a sort of moral decay is a lot harder than just yelling and screaming and pointing fingers and throwing rocks and kicking things over and breaking things down. That's the easy bit. The building stuff up and the bringing people together, the being understanding, the caring and holding space for people, it's very hard, takes more time, and you're at I suppose, a strategic disadvantage in a conflict there because they don't have any of those rules, they don't have any of those sort of burdens of that they have to carry while they're out there just sort of saying and doing whatever will meet their ends, And so I think that's a real challenge that we're facing at the moment, for sure.
I totally agree with you. And it's my observation that anything taken to the extreme is dangerous. And when you're pushing an ideology, when you're pushing a dogma, when you're pushing something, it brainwashes people. And what I find very scary is that generally kind-hearted or educated individuals can say things that are super scary. Like I was talking to someone when it was the beginning of the Gaza conflict, for example. And, the buildings came down and people died and whatever. And that person who is an educated person, well-educated person, very intelligent person, and find ways to justify it, why it's okay for innocent people to die. And I said, I disagree. And then I was asked why I disagree. And I said that the way I look at it, and some people might say it's foolish, the way I looked at it, and I still look at it this way. If in my peaceful town a bomb went off and my building collapsed and I had to dig the dead body of my children out of the rubble, that's how I see it. And remember, as I referred to in the beginning of our recording today, that we did the first interview we did together. And when you said that, if you want change in the world, or along these lines, you said that you have to want the same goodness that you want for you. You have to want this for others, for other people's children, and that's how I looked at it. And look, are there people out there who will do bad things? Yes. Are there morally compromised people? Yes, definitely. But most of the time when we have global conflicts like that, or, like hate speeches go off and people start hurting each other, it's standard, normal, regular people who get hurt. For what reason? It's not cool. And also the extremism of some of these things when we go like, oh, I'm okay, let's say, I'm a Christian myself, and I believe in what I believe in. But as soon as I hear things that it would encourage me or justify why I should be hateful or hurtful towards somebody else of a different belief system, of a different religion, or whatever they call their own God, I have a problem with it. And if at that point it makes me a bad Christian or not a good enough Christian, then be it, because I do not wish to engage in these things. So that's, it comes back to moral disengagement once more. And comes back to like, why do we have to hate? Like, we have to at some point recognize and realize that divide and conquer is an awesome thing to do for those who want to lead. And that's what's going on. Do we really have a reason to hurt and hate each other?
Yeah, I don't know that we have a great moral instruction to start off with. This disengagement, it's definitely a thing. The stuff that you outlined before, they're definitely tools or things that people work through, and you can see that there's a moral disengagement there. But I don't think that we have a great moral engagement to start off with. And children and people, so, I'm talking about probably in the US, Australia, UK, those sort of Anglo, places that sort of say, oh, we're founded on Christian values and all this kind of stuff. Even if you are a Christian, of some denomination, your moral instruction is innate of the church's aims and beliefs, and not necessarily a thorough moral instruction. The church capitulated to the Nazis in Germany. They've done unspeakable horrors all over the place in the name of the church. We've had missions in Australia that absolutely treated the indigenous populations horribly. You can make a case for stoning people and killing people and, the real Old Testament shit out of the Bible. No one ever talks about the Beatitudes and, it's very rare to hear any of the sort of conservative Christians in the States, mention that it does say in the Bible that it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. They're busy telling everybody that they... that they're rich and it means that God loves them. And so all of those things, even that as a moral instruction, is just a self-serving interpretation for whatever you want. And not people aren't taught in schools to interrogate it and pick it apart. And even there's a bit of a modern revival, of like, say, Stoicism for people. It's like gone into a bit of the entrepreneurial sort of, people getting through difficult times, kind of manosphere-y, whatever. But even that's innate of sort of an individualistic pursuit of managing yourself as opposed to a moral commitment to the world. And the important aspects or the community aspects of all of these things, all these kinds of interpretations, they sort of get left by the wayside for whatever seems to justify, an individual person. And what their aims are, or what the church's institutions are, or the individuals' sort of goals are. And so I think like the moral decline is not just that people are stepping away from their morals. I don't think we really developed a great sense of what sort of moral integrity looks like for a lot of people, for them to even understand that they're stepping away. What they've actually done is act in their own best interests a lot of the time. That's worked out pretty well. And then when a few people start to take advantage of it and you get this huge amount of inequality, then you want to be on the right side of this kind of breakaway group that's taking more and having more and doing more over here and leaving this kind of poor people behind. As people want to get into that group, whatever it takes to leave these people. And if that means I have to think of them as less, so I have to think of them as different, I have to think of them as being happy with not much, I have to think of myself as being more worthy or better or morally superior, I'll just bend whatever I need to bend around to make sure I'm on that ship that's going, the haves ship. I don't want to be left behind with these have-nots. And then if at some point I need some kind of weird moral or good vibes feeling, we're back almost at this papal indulgence type situation where they're like, well, I'll throw some money that way. I'll peel a little tiny bit off the top here and throw it that way, and I'm good. I've done my bit, And so I think that our moral instruction to start off with isn't great, that people aren't interrogating what they think about the world and their commitment, what their responsibilities might be to their, to people and the planet and all that sort of stuff. The more individualized we get, the more othering we do, the more inequality we get, the less anyone wants you to think about it. And so again, it's like that role is to bring people back together, back into community, think about stuff more, to pay more attention, to workshop, what about this, what about that, why would we invest in this, why would we invest in that? And all of that, the burden of that, the effort of that is exponentially more than just, you know what, all I've got to do is look after me and mine. If they can't get on the rich ship, if they can't get on this side of the divide, that's on them, that's their bad. I'm just doing my best. And then to justify that, I spend a lot of time telling you what I didn't have, what I didn't get, what I'm missing, what migrants are taking from me, what the gaps are in my expectations versus what I've got. And I'll always be able to look ahead and say, there's a guy over there with like $500 billion, literally. So I'm not the worst one. And I don't have the most, like he's got the most. And just always you can justify it that way. That sort of, that advantageous comparison, I think you called it earlier. And okay, cool. So now we're all on our own. Everyone's scrambling to the top. And it's this classic sort of 3-tier society where the people at the top have a second tier that's got a little bit more advantages than the third. The third tier are desperately trying to get to the second are trying to keep them in the third, the second want to get to the first want to keep them in the second, and so they're a little bit of worry, little bit of ass kissing, lot of oppression, and it's like a classic, I'm pretty sure Orwell talks about it in 1984, it's a classic sort of 3-tier society to just keep everyone down, concentrate the power in a tiny number of people at the top. And, when it's working like that, when the ants don't realize there's so many more of them than the grasshoppers, so to speak, as in like whatever that is, a bug's life or ants or whatever, when they don't realize, that it works really well. And then when they realize and go, hang on a minute, no, we've done ourselves in here. That's when you end up with revolution is really what happens when this gets taken to the extreme. And I think, that it's easy to see the through line from where we are to ending up having some kind of revolution of some form, because, we just can't sustain this level of inequality and division and, lack of cohesive sort of social glue of morality or ideology or just a common goal. It makes it very difficult. So, yeah, I think probably we need a better moral instruction from the beginning before we can be too upset about its decline, because I think people are starting from a very low base. They think they're not. They think they've considered this stuff, but they haven't really. And so because of that, this sort of moral decline is actually starting from a low base that was never tested, that gets a little bit tested, and then you realize actually there's not much there. There's not much. They haven't thought about it. They haven't put any time into that. And I think that's sort of really showing up at the moment.
We're not equipped to deal with these things. These become scary. As you said, we have to start asking questions. Let's say, I can link it back to, for example, let's say I'm a Christian and whatever, but I don't do these things or I don't believe in these things because to me it's extremist. I'm asking, let's ask the right question. Who say that this is the way it should be? Whose idea was it? Was there any political power attached to it? Was there any gain attached to it? Or is it really about truly your spiritual relationship or your inner relationship with, let's call it the divine, let's call it Christ or whatever you want to call it? What is it about? Or is it about, once again, being divided? We are the good guys, they are the bad guys. And also I think a lot has to do with the mass manipulation and media manipulation, and using the technique of let's reward the good behavior, and the good behavior is that what we want you to do, then you're good, you get a little pat on the head. And then if you do the bad thing, which is asking questions or going against what we want you to do, that's a bad thing. We don't want that. And I think it's a process. But from generation to generation, the less questions we ask, the easier it is to get us to a point when we are scared to deal with these things. Because, oh my God, if I ask a question and I realize that I'm being misled and I'm doing the bad thing, because everybody else does, what am I going to do? So that's always hard. And we know that kind of moral disengagement led to a lot of atrocities. If we think about the Holocaust, that was terrible. And it was so well executed that people didn't stop it. They didn't say that, no, you cannot take my Jewish friend away, because everyone lived in fear. And as you said, no, we are not on good moral grounds. It's very interesting. A couple of days ago, when I was preparing for us to come and meet today and, do this recording, I printed out the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yeah. Anyone can jump on the net, you can, download it and read it. And so I thought I fill a gap because I've never read it myself. And I just got to Article 1, which says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Bam! We are failing that on a daily basis. Number 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Bang! We are failing that. Article number 5, no one shall be subject to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. Bam! We are failing that one. And that's just the first couple of points. So, yes, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is wonderful. It's a framework, but we are still working towards these things. We are not getting these things right. And I think a lot comes down to our individual responsibility. And that's what I want to ask from you as my next question, that if it is our individual responsibility, from small building blocks, from little things, big things grow, how does the song go? That kind of stuff. So what can we do as individuals to kind of be mindful of this madness and to be able to do a little better, even if it's hard? How do you see this?
Well, part of it is, I think, to understand that if you neglect your physical body, your physical fitness, whatever, then there are things that get harder, going up the stairs and, going for long walks and carrying your shopping around and that. Like, it gets harder if you have not had the, opportunity and inclination to sort of keep your body in a place where it can do those things, right? But to do that, it's usually there's a bit of discomfort, there's a bit of inconvenience involved with maintaining some level of physical ability. And whether that means like you're walking instead of driving somewhere, or you're going to the gym, or you're playing sports or whatever, like there's a time dividend, there's an effort, there's a risk of injury, there's all of these things that happen, But at the end of the day, like if you don't, these other difficulties are going to be put on you. So you kind of go, well, this is hard and a bit annoying and it takes a bit of time and it's a bit inconvenient, but I'm going to do it because otherwise all this other stuff's going to get hard all the time and that's going to be annoying. So you make this little trade-off between a bit of discomfort and a bit of difficulty and a bit of inconvenience in order to avoid a whole bunch of other discomfort and inconvenience. And if it's a weird trade-off, to do that, it's a bit strange to make yourself uncomfortable so that you're not uncomfortable later. But, we kind of understand that makes sense, and that a lot of us understand, like, you got to do it. And if you've been sitting around too long, like, your back starts to hurt and then your back hurts all day and that sucks. So you're better off to just move around a little bit each day and avoid the back pain. When we talk about what people can do close to home, I think it's a similar setup where as we try to avoid being uncomfortable, as we try to avoid inconvenience, as we try to stay away from these difficult moments, we're creating a society where everything's difficult, So when I don't talk to my neighbours, where I avoid family members who I don't agree with, where I don't ever talk to people who I don't like or don't know that well, where I don't expand my capacity to listen and talk and understand and read and show grace, where I don't do that, I end up living in an insular society with all these, like, where the social fabric is being ripped apart because we're not making this inconvenient, difficult move at the beginning. And while I totally understand that things are difficult, and that, you know, people's emotional energy and their financial resources are strained, and, you know, that they are scared or whatever about certain things, that every day, that latent fear, that background hum is like the back pain that you need to do some other uncomfortable stuff to mitigate. You can't hide away from it. It doesn't get better if you disengage from it completely. It doesn't get better if you remain in your own echo chamber. A background hum gets louder in an echo, you know? You need to get somewhere where it isn't an echo to take that out. And so at an individual level and at a small group level, it's about being expansive in the people that you speak to and the space you hold for other people. It's about trying to understand where people are coming from that you don't agree with. It's about taking the time to, where the opportunity presents itself, speak to people that are just put in front of you, that you have nothing, that the universe is just put in front of you. I'm talking about people on a bus or people in a cafe, or, you know, people like that, you know, one of your family members has brought someone home and, you know, you're like, I'm not sure about this guy. He's got some weird views. Well, that's the world, man. So like, sit with them. Like, you're in a space, have a chat, do the things. And I think that little bit of discomfort and that risk, you know, there's a risk of injury when you train. There's a risk of being upset when you talk to people you don't agree with. There's a risk of frustration, all of these things. But they force you and they teach you the tools, the skills, and the awareness that we actually need if we want to bridge these broader challenges. And if you don't spend time with any of these people ever, and you never talk to these people, then, like, if you complain about a group of people you've never had anything to do with, you need to shut up. I just, like, what's the point? You've absolutely got no idea what you're talking about. Like, where'd you get that information from? The Herald Sun? Like, they just want you to be mad. That's a silly place to get your information about it. And if you do break bread with people, you'll find that they're like, it's really hard to comprehensively hate everything about somebody. Like, it is really hard. There was this Bandura article, and it's a joke internet news site. But it was like, I remember it was, perhaps came up during the floods or something, and it was like, guy you know with some of the most backwards, like, ideas about race is the most useful person in a crisis. And it was basically like, the story was, you know, you're stuck in a flood, he's got he comes, he picks you up, pulls you out of the mud, helps you sort your house out, gets the power back on, does all this practical stuff, but like also says some pretty racist stuff, you know, like he's, you know, and it's like, okay, great. I know plenty of people like that, have met plenty of people like that. And so it's really hard to just write them off as being like, you said this thing that I think is wildly incorrect and horribly racist. But at the same time, you do jump in your car at 2 a.m. in the pouring rain and drive down the road to pull your neighbour's tractor out or help him get out of so you can't be wholly bad, you know? You just can't be. And it's a horrible thing to try and write someone off as wholly bad. And instead of emphasising that one thing that says you're wholly bad or that one thing that says you're wholly good, you go, you're a human, and I would love to try and drag that good caring bit of you that gets in the car and goes and picks that person up at 2 a.m. I'd love to just get a bit of that over to like how you see migrants or Aboriginal Australians, or, you know, like, if I can just get you to see your neighbour at 2 a.m. in the rain in a similar way that you, like, if I can get you to see these people in a similar way, then I know that you would do whatever. Like, you would do whatever for these people. But you can only broaden that sort of circle of care usually by putting people in contact with each other, by doing the things like working side by side, breaking bread, like literally eating meals with people, eating food from other places, talking to people in a context where you've got something else to talk about that isn't just what you disagree on. So maybe it's at a football game, you both go for the same team, or you're, you know, at a pub and you're playing darts, or you're playing sports, or, you know, you're working on something side by side, you've got cars that you're interested in, or you know, anything else. And all of those things can help you soften your views about whoever, you know, and that could be the guy from the country who's never spoken to someone, you know, with a fringe and blue hair from Northcote, and then someone, you know, who's never spoken to someone from Sudan, someone from, you know, Roeville, one of the racists out there, who's never had lunch with someone from South Sudan, and you go, oh, well, he likes footy, you know, they're nice, like, they're very friendly. Geez, the stuff they went through is horrific. Like, I'm here complaining about what it's like growing up in Rowville, but these guys came from a war zone. Like, I never really twigged how bad that is. Like, that's crazy. That's how you start to bridge those gaps. But you've got to be uncomfortable, because you're going to be put in rooms with people that you don't 100% agree with or love, and that you're not fully in control of who they are. And I think that we spend a lot of time trying to keep that discomfort out of our lives by curating and only spending time with these people that, that we've curated around us that sort of meet those check boxes. And so, it's getting a bit uncomfortable. It's holding a bit of space. It's realizing no one fully likes you either for everything that you say or do. People disagree with you. People who love you very much will disagree with stuff. And then as you go through that and you're confronted with these moments, like, he said this horrible thing, but he did this wonderful thing. Moral effort is taking the time to think about that and go, so how do I feel about that? How do I feel about that? Like, is there enough car towings that can undo the fact you voted for this politician who's overtly racist? Maybe, maybe not. Are you going to get more exposure to people who have these ideas that I hate if I disengage with you completely? Or can I be someone who represents a different idea of how the world can be that you like? That you can go, in the same way I'm saying he's not that bad to some of my mates about stuff, you're saying, he's not that bad as like a lefty weirdo who has a compost bin and wants to drive an electric car. No, he's all right though. Like, he does this other stuff too, and whatever, he enjoys a beer or he does it. And that softens the edges for everybody, because when no one knows someone who's a bit all right that represents this other thing, it's really easy to keep everyone separated, and it's very difficult. So I think at a small level, it's like, putting yourself around, being in the world as it comes to you, not trying to make your own world constantly, and not trying to structure it so you never bump into people or never have this tension around stuff where there's disagreement or uncertainty. Just go, look, the world is full of everybody. If I want everyone to be accepted for everybody, I should try and accept everyone myself. And if I want the best for everyone, I should bring that attitude into every interaction, and I should make an effort to have, a cosmopolitan interaction, a worldly interaction with people from all kinds of different places. And not just in this sort of touristy way where I can write people off as being like, oh yeah, Venetians are weird because they're in Venice, but I don't see them as people. They're a thing I went and saw on a holiday. That's not the same thing as being like, growing up, I meet these Vietnamese and Cambodian people. The newspaper tells me that they're all trying to take over the country and kill everybody, and I've just been there eating dinner and getting help with my homework, and their parents are working 20 hours a day, and I'm like, I don't see any of that here. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, there's a couple of people who might be doing it, but there's a couple of people of every denomination, of every color, of every creed, of every background that are doing that kind of stuff. People do it, and they do it for a range of reasons. So I think if we can do that, if we can lean into that, we'll break down a lot of the most challenging aspects that we have of bridging those divides between people.
Absolutely. Look for our similarities, and also make friends with facts. There's apparently 8 billion of us on this planet right now, if not more. We are very, very different in so many ways, but we are also very, very similar. And you remember we did the first interview we did, the first time we talked, and I'm really big on like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and whatever. We all have the same needs, and let's remember that we are also very different where our basic needs are met. So we are not hungry, we are not scared, and so on and so on. So also let's consider that maybe people who are desperate and suffering will be very different from people who have all kinds of comforts and luxuries in life. So yeah, let's bridge the gap and try to look for the similarities. And well, we spent about an hour with our talk today, and we could talk forever, I'm sure. Is there anything you would like to add to this crazy, huge topic? And I think we are kind of ending it on a very positive note, that let's look at our humanity, and let's look at the things that unite us, and stop the fear, and stop the hate, and stop the madness, and really look for, like, how can we unite somehow? How can we find those things that makes us stronger as humanity, regardless of who is in power, or, what is the current ideology, or, in which way the wind blows, I think.
For sure. And I think also I would encourage people to engage with ideas fully. And, the idea, like, morals aren't, I know people love to talk about the Ten Commandments in the States and stuff, but that's not the only moral lesson. It's not even the most comprehensive one, even in the Bible. And people have debated and discussed and talked about and interrogated morals and moral circumstances and, ethics. It's a whole branch of philosophy and theology that has been going for thousands and thousands of years. It's not set in stone. It's not locked in. And so you could contemplate it for your entire life and still not quite fully get there. But the contemplation is worth the effort. And there was a moment, I was just explaining to my partner about the Reformation. There was a moment, back in the day, the Catholic Church sort of had this monopoly on the, God and the Bible, and, people largely couldn't read it, and so they didn't, and they were just getting told what they were getting told, and they were getting manipulated, and there was self-serving interpretations coming out of the Catholic Church that were to the detriment of normal people, but absolutely to the benefit of the clergy. And so this guy, Martin Luther, learns how to read in Latin, reads the Bible and goes, guys, I know we've been doing all this stuff in the name of the Bible, but first of all, none of this stuff is in the Bible. And second of all, the Bible says all this other stuff that we never talk about that, like, means we don't actually need to give all our money to the church all the time. We don't need to listen to what they're saying all the time about this stuff. Like, this is crazy. They've been taking advantage of us. And I think we're in a similar moment where people have once again stopped engaging with ideas and deeply. And so you're getting little tidbits from the internet all the time, these, like, who are essentially gatekeeping understanding for people who don't take the time to go and dig into them. And there's a privilege involved in being able to read and having the time to, and the literacy, and I totally understand that. But there is a huge difference between watching someone, even today, like watching us talk about something for an hour, or watching a 15-second clip or a 5-minute clip if you're really, like, got a really great attention span, and reading an entire book, or investigating something where someone has thought through objections and answers, or even reading fiction where they've worked through these moral challenges or these political challenges. And I would encourage people to read whole books, think whole thoughts, read the entire Bible. It's a slog. It takes ages, and it will take you ages. There's some good yarns in there. There's also some crazy stuff in there, crazy stuff. And when you get to the New Testament and you read about the life of Jesus Christ, if you're one of these people, if you think any of these Christian nationalists in the United States in any way represent anything that Jesus Christ, the prophet, was, or Son of God, however you want to interpret it, if you think that they're demonstrating any of the behaviors he was encouraging, I mean, okay, cool, fine. But I think you'll read it and go, what are these guys talking about? Not just pulling out little individual bits and using one line to justify some abhorrent thing that you're doing, but to actually read it and sort of get the whole thing, and then read other stuff. And I think if you do that, your capacity to, again, resist this sort of moral disengagement will grow, because you'll have more tools, you'll have more scenarios, you'll have more things you're aware of. And we need that. We need people to pay more attention. So I think, like, get involved with, like, full ideas, full books, finish them, read them all the way through, think about them, discuss them with people, and do that sort of stuff. And I think we'll all be better for it.
I agree completely, especially when it comes to theology and religious studies and the Bible. And that's a book it's many books actually that's been put together by people, And we know that the whole idea of the text where it got canonized, and certain things got left out and certain things got put in.
Yeah.
And we also know that for a very, very long time, church had power, church had money, church had land. So we know, look, at the end of the day, people are people, and people are smart and resourceful. And so they will use whatever they can use to get to where they want to, where they want to be. And that's true to religion, and that can be political ideologies, and that they keep resurfacing and coming back because there's nearly nothing new under the sun. So let's just be mindful of these things and mindful of our own responsibility, as you said, to really question things. And do not be afraid to dig deeper and to share these ideas and ask questions and let's get to know each other so we can find those similarities that can help us connect.
100%.
Awesome. Well, I thank you so very much, Josh, for jumping on for the second time with me. And I hope all of those who are watching and listening can take away something positive. And I hope we get to experience and see really wonderful changes in the world, and we start connecting to each other.
I agree. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye.